It is therefore very difficult to envisage a beginning in the absolute sense of the term, because a Big Bang took place 13.787 plus 0.020 billion years ago. The moment that precedes a Big Bang is the Big Crunch. It is the reverse question that is delicate. All the origins that we know and that we can think of are in fact outcomes of previous processes. A thing can only be born from other things that pre-existed. The problem is that, by virtue of this, the genealogical tree of origins cannot have a beginning. If it had a beginning, it would be necessary to explain the transition from nothingness to a first thing. Now, if nothingness ceases to be nothingness, there must have been something for this transition to occur. So, before a Big Crunch, there is an eternity, because a beginning cannot exist. The paradox of time. But then, the probability that 13.787 plus 0.020 billion years have elapsed, the existence of a finite time interval, since our Big Bang is zero, because there is an eternity of time before the Big Crunch, and therefore the probability that we are before a Big Crunch is 1, and that we are at 13.787 billion years from the Big Bang is 0. False. Indeed, by definition, a state of infinite duration without Big Crunch cannot end in a Big Crunch, because time moves only in one direction. We were necessarily before in a state that will lead to a Big Crunch, so it had either started with a Big Bang or not, and this time cannot be infinite because otherwise it would never reach the crunch. So it is finite and begins with a Big Bang, a period that indicates a beginning of a process that will lead to the crunch. The only solution to this problem is that there were an infinity of Big Bangs, and therefore Big Crunches that precede us. An infinity of Big Bangs all end in Big Crunch, so all the Big Bangs end in Big Crunch. So there are an infinity of Big Bang and Big Crunch ahead of us. So we live in an eternal and cyclical world. The question of human existence. I exist for only 70 years. Materialist position. Probability of existing 70 years in eternity is 0. In fact, in an eternal reality, everything has always existed. Or otherwise, everything that is temporal does not really exist. Here, really existing means having a temporal existence within complete existence, on the scale of infinity. That is to say, having an eternal existence. Only solution for us to exist eternally. We are eternal. We have existed an eternal number of times, and we will exist an eternal number of times. On reincarnation and randomness. If we consider that we do not reincarnate, and that we are alive only when we are born and when we die, then we do not really exist. We exist nevertheless temporally, because even if the probability is 0, in the notion of probability there is the notion of randomness. But pure randomness does not exist. For example, there is an infinity of numbers between 0 and 1. One chooses a number randomly. There is 0% that a particular number, whichever it is taken, yet a number has indeed been taken. This shows that pure randomness does not exist in reality. False argument. The event of taking a random number is 1. In fact, the argument holds because the present moment is not random. We cannot deny the materialist position only with probabilities, consciousness and matter. But we can simply say that I have a consciousness and an unconsciousness, properties of a non-extended mind, and that therefore an arrangement of atoms without life or consciousness cannot create this perception and experience of self. An arrangement of atoms determined by our genes is not going to make the atoms hallucinate. So a part of us is not limited to our body. This spirit is clearly distinct from matter in view of its properties. Now what exists, including matter, energy, has always existed and will always exist, just in different rearrangements, so our consciousness is eternal. The unconscious part. Indeed, for example, a noise can wake us up while we sleep, but we do not hear this noise consciously. It is our unconscious that hears it and wakes up the consciousness unconsciously. We can therefore deduce an unconscious part in us. This unconscious part cannot be accessed consciously since it would no longer be unconscious. But we can deduce its existence because we can know that it interacts unconsciously with our conscious part. In other words, we can think consciously of what is unconscious. The conscious part is in fact the surface of our mind. So one could suggest that when we reincarnate, it is this unconscious part that is preserved in the body of a newborn. Against resurrection, for resurrection, I have plenty of arguments, but if we admit that it is true, then we will exist in eternity in the afterlife. We live a finite time. So the probability that we are alive now is 0. False argument for the same reason. The real problem posed here is, where were we before being born? We would be both non-existent for an eternity and existent for an eternity, which is impossible because fundamental things are eternal. Resurrection is false because assuming that we resurrect with our same body in an imaginary place different from existence, heaven, hell, for eternity, all managed by a god, is simply absurd. Violation of Occam's razor, but also how to refute a complete absurdity. Indeed, the finite and the infinite cannot coexist, yet we are alive, so resurrection is false. Except if souls are created gradually in this world, but in that case we are not eternal. Or else we are alive before being born, but in that case it is closer to reincarnation. Conclusion. Eternal information. In conclusion, our mind being part of the fundamental elements of existence, with energy, matter, it is eternal and exists temporally through a cycle via reincarnation and has a real existence in all cycles. Material objects having a lifespan of 0 unit of time compared to infinity do not exist in the absolute sense. In fact, what is most fundamental to reality is our mind, because it is preserved much longer than any other material object. The information stored in our computers, books, etc., a part of us, our mind? Basically, the only real thing is information, and the latter is understood only by a consciousness, and it is information that remains. Like the ideas of Plato or Aristotle, all information is mathematical. So it is congruent because mathematics are eternal, and therefore information, arrangement of energy and matter, NARS, mathematics, is the ultimate reality. Subscribe to Singular Waveverse